almost didn't know where to look for these green vestments. We're back in ordinary time. And the 14th Sunday of ordinary. I'm trying to figure out where the other 13 Sundays are. We've been celebrating the central feasts of our church. And now we come back to what I affectionately term as discipleship Sundays, where the readings really are lessons for us in particular about what it means to follow that same Christ that we journeyed with during Lent and celebrated at Easter and then celebrated the coming of the Spirit at Pentecost and all of the great saints that have preceded us. Now it's our turn. How do we follow Christ? The readings today are quite interesting, and I think there's a couple of the terms in here that we probably need to spend some time with. What's kind of interesting is, of course, that second reading that talks about the Spirit of God, that Holy Spirit that we celebrated in a special way at Pentecost, and how it fills us at our baptisms and gives us the power to go forward as disciples of Christ. And that being said, we turn to a couple of other things. First of all, you notice in the first reading from the prophet Zechariah and in the Gospel, we find references to the word meek. Meek. Now, Zechariah, the prophet, was trying to lift up his people. They were pretty depressed. About 100 years before, they had come back out of captivity, and they thought they could rebuild the glory of the kingdom of Israel. And they weren't able to do it. Things just kept conspiring against them, and they just weren't able to do it. They were depressed. And Zechariah got up with a message from God of great hope and anticipation that in the future God was going to come. And how was he going to come? It says he is meek. Now that's not a term we normally associate with a powerful king. How would this give hope to those people? Furthermore, this meek king who was going to come, this God, was also going to eliminate all warfare and violence. It was going to be a kingdom of peace. A meek king. We have to understand that in the ancient world, the term meek meant something completely different, almost the exact opposite of what we mean today. When somebody says, oh, go be meek, usually you think, oh yeah, you just want me to be passive and take everything that comes and just kind of be a milquetoast and let it all just hit me. That's kind of our sense of meek. It's a passive thing. But in the ancient of days, almost every king around the ancient world was referred to as meek and mighty. How do you combine those two? Meekness was a trait that was active. I have power, but I choose not to exercise it for myself, but for others. I keep my own power in check for the good of others. In fact, it was also used in other ways. And if you ever remember the movie Ben-Hur, remember the famous scene where Judah Ben-Hur has come back into the Holy Land, and he encounters the great sheik that has those 4 powerful horses. And what Judah teaches that sheik is that these 4 individual horses, as mighty as they are, will never win a race because he has them harnessed wrong. You need to put this horse over here because this is where his strengths will lead them best. And you need to put this horse here because a little bit slower, but this is where this will work best. And in the turns, this is how this will all come together. In a way, it's how do we harness our strength? And for what purpose do we harness our strength? We come back now to this notion when we hear Jesus talk about the yoke. Now we can all conjure up images, I suppose, of someone being in a yoke or an animal being in a yoke. There's an ancient legend that said that Jesus, learning his trade from his father Joseph, made the best yokes in Israel. Yokes were made out of wood. They were carved out of wood. Now imagine if you brought an animal forward and put just any old yoke on him and put him to work in the field. What would happen? That yoke would bind and destroy that animal eventually. So they would take it to a carpenter, and that carpenter would tailor-make the yoke to that animal. It was like a bespoke suit in the Middle East. But every yoke was tailored, so it would not be uncomfortable, and the work could be accomplished. What Jesus seems to be saying to us is, take my yoke upon you. My yoke has been tailor-made just for each one of us. No two yokes are alike. So when we put all this together in terms of discipleship, what are we left with? First of all, we are called to model Christ as the Messiah in his meekness. We have been given power. We have been given abilities. But how do we use that power? For ourselves alone? Or have we harnessed that power to put it to best use for others? Are we part of that team that we are called to? And secondly, when we are invited to take on that yoke, we realize the challenge from Christ is each one of us has been given a task. Each one of us has been given the yoke that binds us through the Spirit with Christ himself. Christ who leads us. Christ who shares the journey with us. His yoke is easy and his burden light. Interesting little word game. In Greek, which is what the gospel was written in, what do we call Christ? What is Christ's title? Christos, Christ. When he says, my yoke is easy, that word easy is Christos. And it doesn't mean just easy, it means well-fitted. And so there's that closeness between our Christ and the yoke we have been designed and born to bear. Take my yoke upon you. It is easy, and my burden